Okay, welcome back. We're going to do some modifications to the Valencia farmhouse. Now, as we kept on going with our program, we created the animal object, and we built some other ducks, and also implemented some other interfaces like flying and swimming. Okay, so now that we have all these animals and they do specific things, we can now add it to the big project, which is the actual farmhouse. Now, the farmhouse will take in animals and birds and ducks, which are animals, and they'll do various behaviors. Now, in our interface, we'll go back to the interface now and do some updates, because before we just knew when we built the interface what the farmhouse needed to have as a requirement. But as we take a better look at it, we need to modify the interface so that not only do we want to know what we want every house to have, but we also have to look at how it's going to be handled. Now, when you do a building size, create a building size, you're obviously going to need a length and width. So I added that to the abstract class. Also, when I have to find out what the animal count is, it has to return an integer to let me know what the animal count is. I hope that makes sense to you. And when I set an animal, and that's when I store an animal in the house, it has to take in an animal so that the method could store that animal in the house. And last not least, but when I get an animal, I have to know what animal from what index I'm going to get it from, and I have to return an animal. Okay? So these are logical things that I added to the interface so that when we implement it, it'll make better sense on how to handle these methods. So before we just laid out what we wanted in the interface, what every Valencia farmhouse must have when you create it. So now when we do create it, I modified the methods so that it'll be more useful when you actually do create a Valencia farmhouse. So let's go to one. This Valencia farmhouse implements Valencia farmhouse creating. Of course, as you could see by the little triangles and the overrides, I overrided the required methods. Okay, and that will actually give you your building size method, which took in a length and a width. And let's go ahead and add some variables called int square foot. And what square foot will get you is length times width. So you notice I made the variable private, like I did with farm name and farm color, which is something I added to this class. And the square foot will actually give you the square footage of the farmhouse when I create it. Now, you know this is public, and when I create the constructor, I'm giving it a set length and width, and I'm assigning it to square foot. Okay? But we don't want to do that exactly, because as you could see what I do when I set the name of the farmhouse and I set the color of the farmhouse, which are added methods to this farmhouse, they're private. And the only thing that's public is when I return the name of and return the color of the farmhouses. So we kind of want to do the same with building size. Okay? we don't want to have square foot be modified because you could directly access the length and the width. So that's why square foot is actually private. Okay, so square foot is private. So every time you want to update the building size, say you put a new extension on there or something, you would have to call this method in order to change the square foot value. So when modifying this building, you can't just directly access the square foot and change that from outside. It can only be done from inside the class, and the only way to do that is to call the building size method from the outside and put in a length and width, a new length and width, which will calculate the square footage for the farm. Okay, as you can see from the farm, I added a constructor, and it gives you a length and width, a name and a color when you call it. I have an animal count, which is the override method from the before. But this one returns the animal count, which is a variable that's up here, int animal count. And once again, I want to probably make this private because you don't want to directly access that from outside. You want to have to go through this method to get to the animal count to get the value, but you don't want to be able to modify this animal count from anywhere else. The way the animal count is modified is actually through the set animal. So every time you add an animal, the animal count gets incremented, and that's the only way you could increment the animal count. The one-way channel into animal count is through set animal. Okay. Now, as we said, the animal count will return how many animals we have. In set animal, we take in an animal and add it to an animal array and increase the animal count. So this animal array that we have right here, which is ArrayList of type animal, only takes in animals, will add a new animal every time you call this method right here. Okay, so right down here we have a animal get animal, which returns an animal at a certain index that you provide. And of course we talked about the set name and get name, set color and get color. Alright. Actually, before we move on, let's see here, the array list also, I forgot to do this. The array list should also be private. I think you're starting to get a pattern here, as all of the variables that I declare are private, and the only way to access them is through methods, and you can only do certain things with them, and that's all by design, so that data cannot be corrupted or somehow accessed inadvertently by anyone who calls the object. This is done in a certain way so that the contract is met and you only have one-way channels to get to variable names. Talked a little bit about polymorphism and also encapsulation, and we have a demonstrating of both by when we implement the farmhouse creating and also by setting variables to private. We have good examples of both of those, one-way channels and inheritance, on how this farmhouse is being created. Okay. Now that we update this code, let's go ahead and look at test again. And I added to test, in which I called a constructor. The variable name is Gasai Farm. Named a farm Gasai Farm. My favorite color is blue, so I made it a blue farmhouse. And it's 100 by 100, so about 10,000 square feet. And I added some animals, the bird 1, bird 2, and duck 1. And I have some print statements. Welcome to the name of the farmhouse. The animal count is, give them the count. And I told it to get the third animal from my object. Now if you look down here, it says welcome to Gasai Farm. The animal count is 3. The third animal is Daffy. And all those are correct. This is the way you have your assignment going right now, that you kind of want to take a look at how you add objects to your theme park right now. Okay, if you're not working on a theme park, this is the way you should look at how you have other objects being added to your class. Okay, so you built some of these animals and these objects, and we added it to the farmhouse. So it should be starting to come all together for you right now. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.